that doesn't know you, could you describe a little about yourself?
Sure.
Who are you?
Yes, sir. My name is Anoulack. I'm originally from Laos, which is in Indochina. It's in between Vietnam and Thailand. I've been in Australia since I was a little boy, about 6 years old. We came here as refugees from Laos in about 1984. I've got 3 brothers, and of course mum and dad as a family of 6, arriving and settling here in southwest Sydney, where we've been since we arrived in Australia.
Do you remember much about your early life back in your home country? I know you came when you were quite young.
Well, look, not much. I think I was way too young as when mum and dad decided to leave Laos, and I would have been extremely young. And so my memory of that particular period is not as clear as I would like, but there are snippets of things that sort of are etched in your memory, but nothing really vivid. But certainly I know that as my older brothers or my parents would have much more clearer memories of that experience.
Can you tell us, what do you remember of, well, firstly, can you tell us why you had to leave your home country, your understanding of why you had to leave, and then perhaps do you have any memories of the actual journey?
Yeah. Well, look, as from what I've been told, I mean, the reason for a lot of families, not only my own, for leaving Laos and parts of Indochina, was due to the conflict around the 1970s. So, as I understand it, now we the family crossed the Mekong with many other families as well, and settled in a Thai refugee camp for a short number of years before being, really fortunate to be resettled right here in Australia. So, my family and others, I no doubt, are extremely lucky to have come to Australia, and no doubt other countries around the world as well as part of the resettlement program. So, the journey is no different, I suppose, to many other refugee families, whether it's in the 70s or post-World War II, about the journey and the resettlement process, and a real sliding door changing moment for so many people, including myself.
And what was it like for you and your family when you first arrived in Australia?
Yeah, look, from memory, when we first arrived, so we were originally at the Villawood centre for the hospital, which back then, as I recall, was much more of a hostel rather than the immigration detention centre that it actually is today. So I recall we were settled there very early before we moved out to a house in Cabramatta. And from there, mum and dad obviously found jobs, manual labour-based jobs, because they didn't necessarily have the language or the skills. And so from there, obviously, they worked very hard. There were 4 boys to look after, and the boys just went to the local public school and really sort of made the most of the opportunities that were presented to us.
What kind of barriers or obstacles did your family face when you first arrived?
Well, look, from everything, from the start, language, skills, understanding of institutions, how to find employment. I mean, at least for my mum and dad, I mean, for the boys, we were obviously naturally schooling's your first destination. And of course, even at the start, language was a barrier. But I also think that as a young kid, you pick up language very quickly. And so it happens that Cabramatta East Public School also had a number of kids who came from very similar backgrounds, and also it's a real melting pot of kids from all around Indochina, and also from the Slavic areas of Eastern Europe as well. So a real, I suppose for a young kid, the adjustment maybe is not as great, maybe as for much an older person, because you're just a little kid. And so when you're a young person, you just want to go and play, you'll learn a few things. I mean, the teaching staff at Cabramatta East Public School are nothing but superb in trying to teach kids, but also trying to engage with them. And I just have very fond memories of my time at Cabramatta East Public School. And
what sort of impact do you think that that refugee experience had on your parents? Obviously, you can't talk for them, but in your view, how would you say that has impacted their the way they have built their life going forward?
Yeah, look, I think certainly anyone going through that sort of journey in life where you're packing up everything that you know, that you're comfortable with, your social set, and then literally moving to an unknown place, an unknown destination would only, I think, A, it's a very brave and courageous decision. I think B, would always instill a really sense of resilience and knowing that there's going to be significant challenges that you will face and being able to adjust to an environment for which you almost have zero control and very little influence in what the outcome might be. So I think that sort of personality and character and emotional building it would happen to anybody who'd actually had that same journey. So in that sense, it instilled in them, maybe instilled it to me or my brothers or any other young kid from their parents, a willingness to always work hard, to be focused, to be resilient.
And can you tell us more about your life since then? So since you left school, what have you been doing?
So look, firstly, I had a very fine public education, and that I think is so instrumental in providing kids, all kids, of opportunity who have a willingness to learn. So my education opportunities has actually allowed me to go to so many different places, see so many different things. Upon finishing high school, I went to university and I studied economics. I'm an economist by training, and since finishing university, I've had a professional job as an economist. Before getting elected to the local council in 2004, I was only in my mid-20s then, so quite young. And from then, of course, I then took a small sabbatical to study overseas in London, which also was quite enriching for me, both intellectually and personally. And then from that, of course, upon my return from my studies in London, there was an opportunity to represent the local community here in Macquarie Fields. And since then, I've obviously been elected 3 times, and I'm very grateful for the community's support in allowing me to represent them. And upon the 2023 election results, where we were able to form government, I've been appointed as the Minister in the Labor government. And
I was just wondering, what prompted you initially back then to get into politics?
Well, I think I've always been interested in politics. I think it's an important vehicle for change. I think if we look at the greatest, some of the most significant movements in societal change, it has always involved the political process. It's not the only way we create change in society, but it's certainly an important part of that change. You think of things like the Civil Rights Movement or the vehicle to recognise Indigenous Australians in the referendum. So politics and the institution itself, it plays an important role. And I've always been interested in public debate, contemporary affairs, and also how communities function and the important role that public representatives play. So one's always been a personal interest, and as part of that, you sort of get engaged in the political system, the wider political system, helping out, try and think about issues that are important to you, seeking opportunities to represent your community, and here we are.
Do you know how your family managed to leave Laos and arrive in Thailand?
Yeah, look, it was certainly, look, I don't know the full specific details. I mean, I was only a young lad, so mum and dad would have picked up the family and took what little that they had and just made the journey. I suspect with a level of secrecy, I would have thought would be the common approach. I mean, you don't tell the world that this is what you're going to do, so there certainly would have been a level of secrecy, a level of discretion about who knew, who didn't know, even amongst your family and friends. So you don't want to risk your journey from happening if you obviously televise that to all and sundry. So in that sense, I suspect there was an element of discretion about it all, being circumspect and obviously choosing a time where where you were less likely to be seen.
Can I ask you a few questions about when you started to settle in Australia and start to feel Australian? Can you share with us a moment where you felt a real sense of belonging to Australia?
Look, I think when you're very young, when you start to settle, I think you're very innocent about life and how sometimes the wider society can be very different. So, I mean, my life as a young kid was always, around school, playing around with some friends who had very similar backgrounds. So in that sense, we're all sharing the same Australian journey together. So I've never felt out of place. I think that, Australia, the success, I suppose, of every migrant story in Australia is not necessarily a story of success of the individual, but actually of our community and what Australia stands for, and the values that we hold around egalitarianism, the importance of our public institutions, and the public investment that we make in our people. So those successes, I think, are indicative of the success of the nation. So each family, whether it's my own or others, the journey that they've taken and where they end up is, I think, the real success story of Australia as a nation.
And when you look back in your own life, obviously you've had many achievements, but what would you say that you feel most proud of?
Look, I mean, it's not a question that I've obviously given extreme lot of thought to, but I think certainly being elected to the Parliament was important, not only for me, but I think what it says about our political institutions, and that our parliaments need to be representative of modern Australia. So I think in that sense, my election can be a real symbol for others to think that every profession, every opportunity is available to every Australian, regardless of their background or what skills they might have. So in one sense, it's about each Australian knowing that their ambitions and their aspirations for themselves, for the community, for the country, should never ever be sort of contained about who they are and where they've come from. So in that sense, I do think being elected to Parliament has been, obviously personally rewarding and very rich for very enriching for myself. But also, I always think that I hope it does inspire and encourage every Australian from everywhere to think about professions that perhaps they thought weren't necessarily available to them, and that every opportunity in Australia should be available to everyone.
And later this year,
Yes.
Australia will be receiving the 1 millionth refugee arrival. Can you share your thoughts and reflections about that?
Well, look, to the 1 millionth refugee arrival, I mean, how lucky will you be? How lucky are you, in one sense, to land in what is the most wonderful country on the globe, where everybody, I think, should feel a sense of personal success, and that every Australian has contributed to the fabric and the success of the nation, and are looking forward to that 1 millionth person to make their own contribution to the country, because citizenship in Australia is about your ability to contribute in building the community and building the nation, because everyone has a role and an obligation and a responsibility to play their part, no matter how big or how small that might be, or no matter how big or how small you think that might be. It's the way we build the nation together.
Could you tell us a bit more about your current work and the responsibilities that you hold?
Look, currently in the New South Wales Labor Government, I'm the Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading, the Minister for Building, the Minister for Industry and Trade, the Minister for Innovation, Technology and Science, and also the Minister for Corrections.